Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you that you're here today in our Zoom, in our webinar. Um, we had some things lined up for today. We're gonna have four speakers, four experts. You'll hear more about them in a couple of minutes, but I think it's gonna be a pretty exciting webinar, very informative, and that's the goal as well, to inform you guys, to give you a better idea of what these problems actually entail, so that you can use that information when necessary, and you'll hear much more about that. And if you already registered, you also know much more about that. I'd like to thank a couple of people. I'd like to thank the Director of International Understanding, Matai, who you just heard. I'd like to thank Gaitan Gaya Pashat he's our Director of Environmental Sustainability. I'd also like to thank our Director of Club, Angia Berge. I'd like to thank both of our advisors, Nancy Del Prado and Sharon McDonald. But all of this would not be possible if we didn't have help from the district, especially the district secretary, Ms. Soraya Warner, also Mr. Matt Render, Mr. Sean Petty and his team for translating everything, and also just in general, every and each one of you guys for participating. Why we chose to organize this project now? There are a couple of reasons. The first being that we care about our environment, and that should be so for every one of the intra clubs, and I believe that is also so. But there are also some other things, such as we notice that we're in a turning point of awareness, where more and more people are getting aware of what impact they actually have on our environment. And we thought that it was needed to host this project and this webinar and this competition now. We're also organizing this in anticipation of the seventh pillar of the Rotary, which is environment, which has to do with environment, sorry. And yeah, those are our reasons. Those are our goals that we've set to inform you, to educate you, and to hopefully have you guys give a very nice or give you the chance to present a very nice project proposal at the end of this all. Yes, that was what I had to say, and I'd like to give the word back to Matai. Thank you.
Thank you, President Daniel, for that strong welcome. With that, I would like to ask Mr. David Singh if he would like to say his presentation. Mr. David Singh is a representative of WWF Guyana and Suriname for quite some years, and I'm trying to get his bio. Daniel, would you like to present the bio so it can be read and interpreted also?
Yes, give me a second. I think it'd be wise to already start, and then during the reading, I'll present it.
Sorry, come again?
You can start with the bio, and while you're reading it, I'll start presenting it.
Okay, very good. Dr. David Singh is director of WWF Guyanas with responsibility for Suriname and Guyana. He is a Guyanese natural resources management professional with more than 20 years executive and leadership experience in natural resource management, with a focus on governance and institutional development. He has engaged directly with local and indigenous communities, civil society, governments, and the private sector in developing locally driven solutions to align their interests and respond to national and international agreements, such as uh, on climate change, biodiversity conservation, indigenous peoples' rights, and UN Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Singh has led institutional change and worked to enable a range of stakeholders to vision and create sustainable policies that improve livelihood systems that achieve national and global environmental targets. He has worked and learned from a wide cross section of people, developing a strong appreciation of the conservation and natural resource challenges in resource dependent developing countries. It's his PhD is in inorganic chemistry. Take it away, Mr. C.
Thank you very much for that very warm introduction. And I really want to say how much I value the chance of presenting here. Are you seeing my presentation?
Your presentation is clearly visible. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, one of the things about what we are doing this evening is both a good thing and a bad thing. On one side is, of course, the fact that we are together in this space. The bad thing is we are separated from each other because of the COVID pandemic. COVID has taught us a very important lesson, or as we think about climate change. It has made us realize how much we are connected together and how much we need to act together. And that is fundamentally the story about climate change. It affects all of us, and all of us have to deal with it. The other point I want to make before I go into the presentation is the issue that we're talking about today, while we are feeling the effects right now, would like to emphasize that you, the interactors, in fact, you are the ones that will feel the greatest pain unless we pay attention to climate change today. And this is the reason why I believe this particular topic is so relevant for you today, even as you think beyond what's going to happen in the time when you become an adult, when you have children. My presentation will be structured in along these lines. We'll talk a little bit about the greenhouse gas effect. Then we'll look a little bit about what causes climate change and how do we feel these effects, where and who will feel these effects most, when will all of this happen, and what can we do? The picture that you see behind on the screen is that taken by Perseverance. A week ago, it was taken on planet Mars, known as a red planet. So you'll see the red planet displayed at the bottom of the slide, and at the top of the slide, you'll see planet Earth, our home. Let's talk a little bit about the greenhouse effect. And first of all, let's think about what exactly is a greenhouse. A greenhouse is a structure that warms up places because it traps heat. This picture here is somewhere in Europe, and the owners of this house created this structure, a greenhouse made of glass around their house. And the reason for that, it was to keep the house warm. It warms the place up. The other thing it does, it spreads the heat around so that, in fact, there is a certain evenness in the way in which the heat is felt around. And this is particularly important when we talk about and think about the so-called greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect really describes what happens when sunlight hits the earth. When the light from the sun hits the earth, a lot of it is absorbed by the earth and converted to heat, and a lot of it is actually escapes. For the amount that actually hits the earth and is absorbed, the earth then releases that energy, that heat. But because of the atmosphere around the earth, a lot of that heat is actually trapped and distributed around the Earth's atmosphere. That is what is called the greenhouse effect. If it weren't for the greenhouse effect, we would not be able to live on Earth. If you think of Mars, for instance, while Mars has an atmosphere, the balance between the atmosphere and the planet Mars is not sufficient to be able to have a certain heat that allows human beings to live there. And this is over and beyond, of course, the fact that we need oxygen, and Mars doesn't have that amount of oxygen that we have on Earth. Greenhouse gases are mostly those that you see on the screen here: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, and other kinds of gases. The most important ones, of course, as would be the ones in big bubbles, so carbon dioxide and methane. And we'll speak mostly today about carbon dioxide, although methane is still an issue which we need to pay attention to. And why do we need to pay attention to this? The reality is that the amount of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere is increasing. And it's increasing extremely rapidly. That's very important to remember. It's increasing extremely rapidly, especially from around the 1830s or so. That's when it is said that human beings started to experiment with things and to develop engines, the steam engine, and then of course onwards from there. So when you look at, let's say, 1,000 years of the Earth's of the Earth and the temperature of the average temperature of the Earth, what you will find is from 200 years ago and upwards, the amount of greenhouse gases start to rise. Remember, I mentioned earlier that greenhouse gases make the Earth warm. So if the greenhouse gases keep on rising, it means the Earth warms up. The question is, what is the impact of this warming on the Earth? The reality is, if you look at the Earth in terms of its entire life, look back hundreds of millions of years ago, 500 million, half a billion years ago, all the way through, what you'll see is actually that the temperature of the Earth has actually been fluctuating. The issue is more around the time that on the right hand side of the graph there, what is happening at this period of time. And the reason for that, focusing on that period of time, is because that is actually when human beings started to live on planet Earth. So while, yes, the temperature of the Earth would have been hotter for various reasons, not related to greenhouse gases, the temperature of the Earth now, today, in the time of human beings living on Earth, that temperature is rising. And it's rising so rapidly. And the reason why it's rising so rapidly is because of what we are doing to planet Earth. It is called anthropogenic activities. Human activities are called anthropogenic activities that is causing this rise in greenhouse gases. And as a result of the rise in greenhouse gases, you have is causing an excessive rise in the average temperature on Earth. If you look at the graph, you will notice there's a red line at 1.5 degrees Celsius. 1.5 degrees Celsius is considered to be the temperature rise over the next couple of decades that human beings can withstand. If it goes much faster than that, we are not able to adapt enough to be able to meet those changes. What we do see, if you notice, is that the anticipated rise in 2050 could be as high as 5 degrees Celsius. And 2020 and 2100, that is 80 years from now, it could even be higher than that. That is a problem. Where are these greenhouse gases coming from? It's coming mostly from the energy that we use as human beings. And that energy, a lot of it is coming, most of it is coming actually, a large portion of it is actually coming from the use of fossil fuels. And this in itself is an issue. I want to go to one slide, and this is a slide with lots of words. But this slide tells you a little bit about what are the causes of climate change and what are the effects of climate change. Remember, what is causing the root cause of climate change is a rise in greenhouse gases that's happening so rapidly. And that's because of rapid industrialization. Remember 1830? 1830 is the start of the Industrial Revolution. Then in the 1930s, when the temperature started to rise even faster, that was when the motor car and transportation services really took off. It's from our use of energy. It's also from agricultural practices. It is also from deforestation. Deforestation is very important for us because in the Caribbean, of course, we know countries like Guyana and Suriname, Belize, Jamaica, we have lots of forests, and we do need to keep those forests intact. It also comes from consumer practices, from the livestock. Remember I mentioned methane? So methane, a lot of methane actually comes from livestock. The transportation sector, from the use of fossil fuels, of course, from resource extraction and from pollution. And the effects of climate change are in rising temperatures, rising sea levels, unpredictable weather patterns, increase in extreme weather events, land degradation, loss of wildlife and biodiversity. Could you imagine if the sea level rises in low-lying countries? Oftentimes, the people who live in these areas are among the poorest in the world. They will be displaced. Poverty will increase. They would lose their livelihoods. Hunger will grow. And many, many other social impacts will be felt as a result of this. And where will this happen mostly? This is a map of the world. On the left side, you'll see a full map of the world. And on the right-hand side, you'll see South America and Central America. And when you look at the scales, the more you move from green to red, the more at risk those countries are. Look at those countries, where they are. They are in Africa. They are in Southeast Asia. If you look at India and just next to India, Bangladesh, and those highly populated countries. And then, of course, there is the Caribbean. If you look at the top right-hand corner, which is a blowout of the Caribbean, you will notice Haiti, for instance, will be deeply affected. It's one of around the highest risk from climate change. Let's talk a little bit about sea level rise. Remember, the temperature is going to be rising, which means the polar ice caps, where a lot of the ice is captured in these big ice sheets, they are melting. And when you look at the vulnerability, for instance, here in America, what you would notice in those red dots that you see there is that those are the areas that are going to be deeply affected. Think about the many cities that are located there. Let's talk a little bit about the other kinds of things. So I mentioned earlier about extreme weather events, flooding, which comes not only from sea level rise, but also because of the extreme weather events. These are pictures taken from across this region, from Haiti, which has experienced incredible hurricanes repeatedly over and in greater intensity. Florida, where we think, they are going to, because of their wealth, Americans will not be affected as much as we in the Caribbean. Look at Guyana back in 2005, and look at Barbados, what is happening there as well. And so in the Caribbean, we talk about by 2030, we can only allow a rise in temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius to stay alive. That's what we say in the Caribbean. And what can we do? I want you to look a little bit in the graph at the right-hand side and notice that, remember I mentioned the fossil fuel, the energy consumption, and what you'd notice is that among our countries in the Caribbean, some are actually the biggest emitters, the biggest users of energy in the world, and some below the average. So what can we do? Let's look at our energy consumption. Let's also look at the way in which we generate waste and use plastics. Plastics come from fossil fuels. Let us look at protecting our forests. Forests are made up of carbon, of cellulose, which is fundamentally carbon. And I want to end by pointing out and asking you these very important questions. What are the plans do you think are being made for 2050, when you will be 35 to 50 years old, when you will most likely have children, and your children will be asking you and asking your parents, their grandparents, what did you do when in fact you could have done something to save the world? It's getting warm, and we must do something. So thank you very much for the chance to speak with you. In the slides, there is, what I've done is ensure there's a link to all of the slides, so you'll be able to go to those websites and be able to read the information that's there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. First of all, for being so time conscious, but also for the very nice presentation. But I would like to hear what the other participants thought of it. So be sure to place your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Could I also ask if some of you would turn on their cameras? That would make it far more interactive. I think it would be more fun for the experts and for all of us. I think that would make it see, it's already much better. Thank you. So if there are no questions yet for Mr. Singh, be sure to, even if there comes a question pops up, you can put it in the chat box later on. For now, we're going to move on to the next expert, Ms. Chantal Landbrug. She is a partner and consultant at Environmental Services and Support, NVA, and co-founder and treasurer of the Foundation for Environmental Awareness, Research, and Training. As a consultant, she is involved in multi-expert projects for national and international organizations from the public and private sector. She has taught future biology and geography teachers for over 10 years. And through her foundation, she has organized training workshops for students and works towards establishment of sustainable agricultural practices in communities. Chantal believes strongly in informed decision-making and holistic approaches, thereby preventing ad hoc and one-sided decisions. So welcome, Ms. Chantal Landbrug. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Matai. And thank you all for having me this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are. I was asked to present about biodiversity, and I will try to do that. I can obviously talk all day about it, but I will try to give a brief presentation about it. Next slide. Oops. So I will be touching on 4 topics. At first, talk about what biodiversity is, the 3 levels of biodiversity, why it matters, and what individuals can do. Next. Okay, so what is biodiversity? And you might already know it, or you might think you understand what it is, but I'll just give a very simple description of biodiversity to make sure that you understand the rest of the presentation and that you will never forget it for the rest of your life. If you look at the word, it basically can be split into 2 words, biological and diversity. And if you hear these words separately, it becomes a lot easier to understand. So if you think about what is biological, you think about living organisms. And maybe oftentimes when people think about living organisms, they might think trees, they might think different larger animals. Those are things that you can clearly see, and they're all living organisms. Like, for example, bears or cats, dogs, and all wild animals. But also often forgotten are the smaller organisms, or the organisms that are underwater in rivers and in oceans. Think about fungi, about bacteria. Those are all living animals, and they all belong to all living organisms, and they all belong to biodiversity. And so actually the diversity part is basically the variability, all the different types of organisms that you can find on planet Earth. So in summary, biodiversity is all the living organisms that you can find on the planet, and I will show you in the next slide. If you go to the next slide, please, what that can mean. So I have a few slides where I have a question, and I think it would be fun if the participants can just answer in the chat box if they like. What do you think is a more biodiverse picture? Just to see if you understand. The picture on the left or on the right? So somebody wrote B, so I assume you mean the right. Does anyone else have an answer? Left or right? The right? Yes, correct. Everybody agrees that the picture on the right has more biodiversity. Well, probably the experts will not completely agree with me, because there's a biodiversity that you cannot see right away. But just to make it very simple for you, I put this picture, and the visible biodiversity in this picture is indeed, if you look at the right picture, there are so many different plants. You cannot even count the number of different plants in the picture. which means there are different, a lot of variety. There's a lot of variety in there. If you look at the left, it's probably 2 or 3 different plants that you can see. Of course, as I said, there's a lot that you cannot see. So what I'm saying right now might not be completely true, but this is just to illustrate the different, a very clear difference of biodiversity. So next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So again, another picture, and you can answer in the chat box, which is more biodiverse. And these are agricultural landscapes, because that is also part of our environment where we live and where we have an effect as people. Which one is more biodiverse? Left or right? Okay, great. Yeah, I see that everybody is getting it. The left, indeed. So in the picture on the left, you see so many different crops, so many different plants that are used in agriculture. And so the result of that is that you can harvest cassava, eggplant, papaya, cabbage, tomatoes, bananas, squash. I can just probably go on for a while, and you can harvest them at different times of the year. So you'll always have a variety of food. And that is also biodiversity. It's biodiversity on your plate and biodiversity in your yard. And that is also very important. If you look at the right, it's a cornfield. It is very extensive, and that is usually the case for industrial corn. And it's just corn for maybe many hectares, maybe sometimes hundreds and hundreds of miles along the roads. You can just see corn depending on where you are. And so to give you a little background as well on what this means is that, for example, in such a cornfield, because there's just corn and nothing else, if something happens, for example, there's a disease that hits the corn that is letting the corn die, then you have a really big problem, because all of your food is just gone very fast. And to prevent that from happening, people oftentimes use a lot of pesticides to make sure that it doesn't die, but that has other effects on you as a person, the consumer, but also the rest of the environment and the rest of the biodiversity around it. You see there's a forest right there, and the forest there will be negative effects of the chemicals, of the pesticides that are used for such a cornfield. Whereas on the left, you have a very diverse garden. And it doesn't only mean that you have different foods, so you will not have one-sided food, but it also means that it's better for nature. It's better for the different animals, wild animals and plants in the environment. You often don't have to use any pesticides, maybe not a lot of chemicals, maybe not at all. I have a garden like that, and I don't use any, I only use natural products, and it works really well. So that is to give you 2 examples of what biodiversity means in a natural setting and in a more human environment. So if you go to the next slide. Okay, so a little bit more into the details of biodiversity, because I've talked about different animals and plants and other organisms which make up biodiversity. But in fact, there is a lot more detail to that. So there are 3 levels of biodiversity. And at first, I will go into the theoretical part, and then I will use more pictures and illustrate and let you also participate in trying to answer my questions. So the first level of biodiversity is genetic diversity. And in this time of, so when I was growing up in the 90s, if anybody told me genetic diversity, I would have no clue what that means, because I didn't have information, I didn't have access to internet. But now I feel like you probably heard about genetic diversity or genes already. But it's basically, you could say, a sort of a book in your body that describes how what you're made of, what you look like, how you function, and also how you deal with differences in the environment, and how you're able to survive, and how you mate, and all those different things. So and that is basically written into your system. And so genetic diversity means that if you have one species of, for example, animals, although they are the same species, you could say rats in this example, they're all rats, but they have tiny differences in their genetics. There are tiny differences into what is written in their, so to say, book of how their body functions. And that has a lot of advantages, because if there are genetic differences, some of the rats might be better protected against certain diseases, or some might be more successful in reproduction, so they can have a lot more, let's just say, for to make it easy, children, and to make sure that they can live and reproduce successfully over time. So genetic diversity, differences in genetic diversity is very important for a population to deal with different situations. Next slide. And then there is the next level is species diversity. And so species diversity means different types of organisms. So this is just an illustration of different organisms, and the illustration doesn't include the tiniest of organisms, but you can see there are trees, there are little plants like ferns, there are mosses, fungi, a slug, a frog, and a rat or a mole. And so this is just a very tiny snippet of what is possible, but basically it shows that there are different types of organisms, and that is also one level of biodiversity. Next. And then the third and final level is on a larger scale. And so you have different species, and within the species, there are differences in genetic, in their genes. But if you go to the next level, it means there is diversity in ecosystems. And so just to give you some easy examples, ecosystems could be a river or a lake, or different types of forests, savannas, different parts of the ocean like the coastline or the shallow ocean. Maybe if you have kelp forests in the ocean and coral reefs, those are all different ecosystems. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, to the interactive part, what do you think? Which level of biodiversity is this? There is a coral reef here. And is this genetic? Is this species? Or is this ecosystem diversity? And somebody is saying species. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah, I see everybody is writing species. Indeed, that is the case. I can see that you're all paying really attention to this presentation. Indeed, I wanted to illustrate the species diversity. There's a lot of color and forms, and all of these different colors and shapes are all different organisms. So indeed, species diversity is what I wanted to illustrate here. Next slide. Any thoughts here? Do you have any idea what this could be? Species, genetic, or landscape, or ecosystem? I don't see any answers yet. Okay, I see genetic. Yes, indeed genetic. This is all cassava, the cassava plant that gives us the roots, the starchy roots that we can eat. And so there are a lot of different varieties of cassava. They are all the same species, but they have slightly different genetic composition, which makes it possible that you can have different types of cassava. And that is very important because some of them are very good in for example, drier conditions. Some of them have their own chemical pest control, and they can be used for different purposes depending on the variety that you're using. So they all have their benefits in certain ways. And another importance in this case, because I'm mixing natural conditions and also things that we use as humans, is that genetic biodiversity is very important for the plants and animals that we're using. And that is because when, for example, there would be a disease killing off a lot of cassava, then what people do, what scientists do, is look at the different varieties and look at which of them has a strong genetic composition to fight that disease. And then they introduce these to the varieties that we're using, so they can become stronger, or they they let them interbreed to make stronger crops. So having diversity in your agricultural system is very important. And not only the cassava that is grown, but also having the cassava species in the wild is important to that extent as well. If all of your cassava that you are growing for commercially are having trouble, you go back all the way to the savannas where cassava is growing in the natural environment, and you can use those as well to make your cassava species, your varieties, stronger. So next one. Okay. I think this is the last question that I have. Which level of biodiversity is this? Do you know what you're seeing? Is this genetic, species, or landscape or ecosystem diversity? Okay, I see ecosystem and landscape popping up. So indeed, what you're seeing here is a satellite image of an area in Suriname It's in an area where there are higher higher areas and low-lying areas. And so this is what you typically call a mosaic, which means that you have all the different ecosystems in one small area, and they all form a larger landscape. So there is a creek there, a Blackwater Creek, which is surrounded by a forest, but it's not a forest where you can just walk around. It's a swamp forest because it's very low-lying area, and the other brownish parts are actually deeper parts of the swamp, and so there are only grasses growing there. That's why it's slightly different in color and in shapes that you can see. So there is quite diversity there as well. Next slide. So why does biodiversity matter? And I think I mentioned some of it already, but just to capture it all in one slide, everything in nature is interconnected and therefore dependent. So for example, I will just give you an example of Yellowstone Park. Yellowstone Park is in the US, and wolves disappeared from this park due to influences of humans. And so what happened was, because the wolves disappeared, there were too many deers in the park, and the deers, because they weren't eaten, they weren't hunted by the wolves, and so they were eating all of the plants, all of the smaller plants, and because all of the smaller plants were disappearing as well, the water was getting really dirty in the rivers and creeks there. So you see, everything is connected, and because the wolves disappeared, the plants are having problems, and the water is getting polluted. When they reintroduced wolves, all of that got solved over time. Variation provides options and increases resilience. So I actually, when I was talking about the cassava and about the diversity in your garden, I talked about crop variety and tried to illustrate how this works. And what resilience means is that if something happens, you're able to bounce back because you don't just have one option. If, for example, in your garden with so many crops, something goes wrong with the plantain, there's still so many other things you can eat, so it's okay. And the third reason, and it's a very long reason, and I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I think the other people will be touching upon this a little bit, and Mr. David Singh already did for a bit. The different natural systems and species provide different sets of services to us. And one of the services that Mr. David Singh mentioned was climate regulation. The forests regulate climate, and they make sure that we don't get into too much trouble. We're thinking, for example, about climate change, the availability of water and such. But for example, there are all different benefits that we can get from biodiversity. Think about building material that you can get from a forest, food and recreation, medicine for a lot of not just medicinal plants, but a lot of medicines are derived from different animals and plants coming from nature. And protection, for example, mangrove forests protect us against storms coming from the oceans and all the waves that are coming from the ocean during those storms. Next slide. Oh, just one slide back. Okay, so just to wrap up, what can you do as an individual to protect biodiversity? By everyday choices. For example, in your garden, you can plant a biodiverse garden instead of just a cement around your house. You can think about waste, and other people will be talking about in the choices of food that you make and the hobbies that you have. For example, not having wild animals as a pet is a choice that you can make to protect biodiversity. The life plans that you have, you'll be growing up and having to make a lot of decisions, major decisions. Where did you get your income from? Is it very destructive for biodiversity? For example, how will you build your house? What will you do on a daily basis? And will that be destructive? Or will it help biodiversity? You can help spread awareness with your friends and family in school. But now we have all these nice online platforms that you can use to spread awareness about why biodiversity matters. And finally, you can protect biodiversity when you can by speaking up when you see that something is just plainly wrong. People are making wrong decisions and you have an opportunity to make a change. And also just make extra effort. Sometimes there are projects that you can do, things that you can see that are going wrong in your neighborhood and that you can change by just making a little bit of extra effort to protect biodiversity. So that's what I wanted to say tonight. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I am available.
Thank you, Ms. Lundbrug. I really enjoyed the presentation, but I also loved it because it was very interactive. I really liked seeing all the answers in the chat box. That was very nice because that's what it's all about. It should be a dialogue. They're not just cold, dry presentations. It's informative, it's fun, and we're doing it together. If there's any takeaway, I think it will be everything is connected. I really like that message. And I aspire to be a biologist and a paleontologist, so it was especially fun. I'm at the moment experimenting with fungi. I'm trying to graft them into the stems of heliconias, but that's for another time. But I really enjoyed it. I would like to move on to our next speaker, but who is inconvenienced. So we will play a clip, an audio clip, and the presentation will be seen. So there will be, you are still able to send questions, but they won't be immediately answered. So we will forward the questions to Miss Rashid, Miss Annalisa Rashid. So if there are any questions for Miss Lundbrug, please put them in the chat box and we will discuss those at the end of the meeting. So Ms. Annalisa Rashid is an environmental management professional and chartered scientist with extensive project-based experience in coastal marine science and hazardous chemicals and waste. She has significant experience in the Caribbean region and the United Kingdom and is adept at working in accordance with multilateral environmental agreements, national plans, and environmental policies, pursuant to fulfilling national and international environmental obligations. So, Daniel, would you please play the presentation of Ms. Rashid?
Yes, give me.
Yes, go right ahead.
And I would like to thank the Interact Club, Paramaribo, for first inviting me to give this presentation, but also congratulations on what I consider an exceptional concept. This Environmental Olympics, it is certainly very innovative and should definitely encourage action by young persons like yourself. I am sorry I cannot attend the webinar as I would have loved to have heard some of the other presentations, because the topics are certainly very interesting and quite topical. I hope that you all are able to hear me clearly. This is certainly a novel way of presenting, but I do commend the Interact Club for thinking outside of the box. So let's move on to the presentation itself, because as I understand it, we have about 15-20 minutes, and there is absolutely no way we can really get into much detail on marine plastic pollution in 15 to 20 minutes. So what I have done is, throughout the presentation, I have included links to various sources and references so that you can actually click on these links and get a lot more information and spend the time and really look at the various articles or journal articles and reports and so forth, as it relates to whatever you're interested in. So let's move on. So next slide, please. So first we need to discuss, what do we mean by marine plastic pollution? So plastic, by its definition, it consists of polymers, but in order for plastics to fulfill its range of functional uses, because we know plastic is ubiquitous in everyday life, whether it's used to make something soft or hard plastic or flexible, you have to add chemicals. So plastics, in essence, consist of the polymers, the carbon and hydrogen, and chemical additives. And when we speak about marine plastic pollution, it can consist of a diverse range of items, some generated from the use on the ocean and coastal environment, such as fishing gear, etc., or whatever is generated on land. From the large items, the agricultural plastics, to what we're seeing, as you'd see here, a lot of more single-use items such as straws, lids, bottles and bags, etc. Next slide, please. This graphic here gives you an idea of the distribution of plastics in the ocean. Generally, what you see on the surface, so what we probably know about already or have heard about, which is the garbage patches. They have discovered 5 so far. Certainly the largest is found in the North Pacific. But essentially, only a fraction, so 0.5% of the plastics that have entered the ocean actually float on the surface. So what is seen? A half of what has entered the ocean actually falls to the seabed, and a quarter floats just below the surface, so it's actually not visible through aerial imagery and so forth. And the remaining quarter is what ends up on our coastlines and shores, something that we're all very familiar with. Next slide, please. So we have to now define, why is this an issue? Why is marine plastic pollution considered an issue? You'd see from the graph here, it shows that there has been an exponential increase in global plastic production. In 2010, you had an estimated 350 million tons of plastic that was produced. And in 2030, which is right around the corner, it goes up to 700 million tons, so that's doubled. And then 2050, 1,800 million tons. And of course, the more plastics that are produced, if it is not managed as a waste in an efficient manner, it means more plastic pollution. So that's the very simple equation there. 80 to 90% of ocean plastic comes from land-based sources. I know there's another presentation that specifically looks at plastic pollution from land-based sources, so I won't go into it much. Next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to just the extremely large quantities of plastics that are being generated and produced now, and of course the exponential increase in the future, the issue of marine plastic is that the oceans are interconnected, and so what is produced and what is generated in one country, what is considered or littered in one country, may not stay within the confines of that country due to the ocean circulation and currents. It can be transported, and what we find is that it can be transported to very remote areas, such as the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest ocean trench found in the Pacific, and even to the poles, the Arctic and Antarctica. So there are a couple of links there you can have a look at to get some more information, just to see the extent of the problem. That image you see there was taken in French Polynesia. The Google map will show you just how remote it is, and literally in the middle of nowhere. And yet still, you see evidence of plastic pollution, bottle caps, fishing nets, and other pieces of plastic. Next slide, please. The ecological impact has to be considered, and the ecological impact on marine biota is largely due to the ingestion of these plastics and entanglement in these plastics. Beaumont et al. Did a really good overarching study on exactly what are these impacts and as it relates to the provision of ecological services. And what you'd see there from that graphic is that it is overwhelmingly has a negative impact on the various biota, whether it's fish, turtles, birds, etc. You'd see a positive impact for bacteria and algae, and that's simply because the plastics are widely distributed, so it allows our increase in range for these bacteria and algae to to proliferate. Next slide, please. Generation of microplastics and nanoplastics is considered an emerging issue, so to speak. Actually, it was an emerging issue maybe 5 years ago. Now it's actually well entrenched. And what do we mean by microplastics and nanoplastics? These are plastics that have been degraded from macroplastics, such as bottles, etc. Through photodegradation, they have broken up into smaller pieces, known as microplastics and nanoplastics, or they can actually be initially generated as microplastics, and you know this as from the cosmetic beads, maybe in your face wash, or even now the fibers from polyester clothing and stuff. When it's washed and it enters the wastewater treatment, and that eventually goes into the ocean, you have an issue where you're seeing a proliferation of polyester fibers, polyester which is derived from plastic, in the ocean. And what this means now is you have these microscopic pieces of plastic in the ocean, and you have organisms that can intentionally or unintentionally ingest them. And when we say unintentionally, we're now looking at the sort of the benthic organisms, the crabs and other like filter feeding organisms, which can, through their normal processes of feeding, and when they're taking in water, the seawater, the microplastics are now in there, and so it enters their bodies. And as you would have heard me said earlier, plastics contain chemicals, and these chemicals can be extremely toxic. You may have heard of BPA, which was a very popular, there's a very prominent campaign to get rid of BPA in plastics that are used for consumption, like water bottles and storage containers and so forth. These are a couple of some of the extremely toxic and extremely persistent chemicals, persistent organic pollutants, endocrine disrupting chemicals, and they can have a very negative impact on not only organisms, but as at the food chain, the impacts can be transferred along the food chain and ultimately to the apex predators and us, humans. So in the Caribbean, there's actually a very good campaign by the Basel Convention Regional Center for the Caribbean, and they have a very well done website, and it's called Stop the Pop. So the link is there. You can click on it and have a look and see what you can do to inform yourself, as well as see what you can do to protect yourself and protect the environment. Next slide, please. And we cannot forget that we are in a very unique time, COVID-19, and one of the main effects of COVID-19 has been the dramatic increase in single-use plastics. The face masks, the gloves, the takeaway services, etc. So what this has meant is that there's just increased generation and production of plastics that are entering our marine environment. And so the issue is very much topical. Next slide, please. So now we look at the solutions. We've identified what are plastics, marine plastics, and we've contextualized the problem. So we want to say, well, what is being done? And it is a very exciting time to be in this field, because the problem has evolved, and what that means is solutions have to be more diverse, and also the research as well. There's new research that is being generated that informs the solution. So it is a very unique field and dynamic field to be involved in now. How I have addressed the solutions in the subsequent slides is that we look at it at different aspects, at the global level, the regional level, and when I say regional, I mean the Caribbean, then at the national and local level. And so it is true, when we look at the global level, it is a global village, as you would know, as I would have indicated earlier. When it comes to marine plastic pollution, we are all interconnected, and so a global solution has to be a main driving factor to solve this problem. So the Basel Convention, which is a multilateral environmental agreement, recently adopted 2 amendments, which makes it the only global legally binding instrument which specifically addresses plastic waste. And you can have a look at it at that link. At the global level as well, when you consider the life cycle of plastics and from when you extract it to disposal, because in the Caribbean we are primarily an import dependent region, there are certain aspects of that life cycle which doesn't exist in the Caribbean. And this is where you look at the product design, which is you can essentially means using less plastic or reducing packaging, and you look at the manufacturing stages and so forth. And this requires innovation, because it can mean looking at alternatives. It can mean eliminating the need for plastics. But as I said, this is definitely at the global level. It's really the countries that have these industries, the developed countries and so forth, where this solution really is prevalent. Next slide, please. And so here are some links. The first link is actually a really nice library, so to speak, of publications where you can find various reports and journal articles on marine plastics and solutions that are taken at a global level. And then as you go down, you'd see Break Free from Plastics and Let Us Free the Ocean of Plastic Pollution. These are initiatives where an individual can make an impact at the global level. So I certainly encourage you to have a look at these links. Next slide, please. So now we're leaving the global level and we're bringing it down to the regional approach. And essentially, again, what I'm saying is that we're looking at the Caribbean. And in the Caribbean, there is a regional action plan on marine litter management. And it was developed in 2014. It was actually an update of the 2007 plan. And this plan has 5 action areas, and I certainly encourage you to have a look at this plan. You can click on the link there. And essentially, what you'd notice is that at a regional level, it's really about creating what we call enabling environments. And so what that means is if we are an import-dependent country, how do we prevent these plastics from coming into our country when we don't want, because if we import it, we have to then dispose of it. So you can have bans or restriction of importation, and we should be all very familiar with these because they have a lot of these types of bans or restrictions have come into play in the last few years, and these are bans on single-use plastics. Or you can have extended producer responsibility, which is to say that the importer or distributor has to take responsibility and to collect and remove or dispose of the plastics, and also looking at alternatives. Have a look at this plan because it will give you an idea of what should be done in the Caribbean. There are numerous case studies throughout the region, so you look at case studies in various countries. Unfortunately, this plan, as I said, it is an update of the 2007 plan. It did not give a status update on the 2007 plan. So in terms of where countries are at with this regional action plan, it really is, that isn't monitored and assessed, unfortunately, and I consider that is something that I think would be very useful to countries where they can identify how they are progressing with this plan. Next slide, please. And again, here, a couple of links. Have a look at the REM Lit project. That's a very recent project that's funded by the Norwegian government. And it specifically addresses marine pollution in the Eastern Caribbean. And so essentially, these are some initiatives that are being done at a regional level, and I certainly encourage you to have a look at them. Next slide, please. So now at a national level, we focus primarily on consumption and reuse because in the Caribbean, we are, as I said, we are import dependent. So we have to look at what are we, what plastics are we using, and how do we reuse it as opposed to disposing of them in the marine environment. As we said earlier, 80 to 90% of marine plastic pollution comes from land-based sources. So we want to look at improved waste management systems, and of course, monitoring and awareness raising activities. And monitoring means trying to figure out exactly what is the extent of the problem in your country. So it relies on looking at the science and research aspects of it. And then of course, awareness. So to encourage change amongst the population. So those are really done at a national level. And here you see a couple of countries that have taken this nationalistic approach. Belize, who was recently developed in 2019, their Marine Litter Action Plan. And in St. Lucia, a project that's been undertaken whereby they are collecting plastics at various collection points and shipping to a recycling company in Honduras. Next slide, please. So now we reach the question, well, how can civil society, meaning you, Interact, Rotaract, Rotary, contribute to the solution? The one piece of advice I'd give is that we all have to have synergistic and a holistic approach as opposed to operating in a piecemeal manner. Therefore, it's advisable if your country has a national action plan, you look at it and you see as a civil society, how can you contribute? If you want to look at the regional action plan, you can see if your country is implementing it, again, as a civil society, which activities can you contribute to? This one in particular I listed is a roadmap to circular economy looking at addressing marine plastics. Looking at the roadmap where they did identify the key stakeholders, I pulled out a couple where they said, this is where civil society has a leading role. And one of it is develop effective consumer campaigns to encourage consumers to demand sustainable options. And what that essentially means is that we're looking at changing the culture. And as we all know in the Caribbean, I think the world, but certainly the Caribbean, sometimes change has to be demanded by the population, the power of the individual, the power of the collective. And so as a civic society, you can drive or organize those movements, as well as trying to encourage a reduction in plastic usage. It's all well and good to say encourage recycling, but really and truly, if you really should look at the circular economy tenant and what it promotes, and you want to reduce the actual usage of plastic. So you want to encourage persons, for instance, rather than recycle that plastic bottle, it's, have your own water bottle and don't use that plastic bottle. That's sort of what we're trying to engender. Next slide, please. And also from that particular roadmap, talks about raising awareness and providing reliable sustainability information. And what this means, in essence, is that for persons, if you want to encourage persons to make decisions, you have to provide them with information. And there's a wealth of information out there because, as I said, it is very much a very topical issue. There's quite a lot of research that's being done. So as an organization, if you are able to collate and tailor to your country, then and you can use that as part of the whole awareness campaign. And then there is the volunteer monitoring protocols for measuring marine debris. This link here it's a very useful link actually, because it provides a toolkit for obtaining information as to what is the situation in your country as it relates to marine plastic pollution. And I don't know how familiar you are with the International Coastal Cleanup. However, this gives you the guide and data sheets and so forth on how to go about doing coastal cleanups. And these are very important because it provides data and policy decisions, creating that enabling environment, which I said is at a national level, governmental level. It has to be driven by data. So as a civic society, you can see in your country, are there are there coastal cleanups? What is the coverage? Are there beaches or short parts of the shoreline where no cleanups are done? Maybe you can adopt a beach, maybe you can promote and create projects to actually go and do these cleanups, generate the data, and then share it with provide reports and share it with your governments. Because it's one thing to actually do the activity, i.e. the cleanup, but if you don't share that data with the government or whichever agencies involved with looking at policy to manage marine plastic pollution, then it becomes meaningless. Next slide. So you'd see here there's a slide for questions. However, unfortunately, I am not there. But next slide, please. You'd see that I have left my email address, and certainly feel free to reach out to me. Again, thank you very much. I am aware I went a bit over the time limit. I do apologize for that. But once again, thank you. I applaud the Interact Club. This is a very, very terrific initiative. And I do hope that this was a very informative session to you all. And, I wish you all the best with this webinar and your projects. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Although she's not here, still a very big thank you to Ms. We would like to, be sure to place your any questions in the chat box, or as Ms. Annalisa said, send her an email. I would like to ask the interpreter if everything is going smoothly and everything is understandable. Okay, I'm assuming it is. I would like to move on to Miss Gina Griffith. I'll get her bio here. Yes. Gina Griffith has a master's degree in Surinamese law and master's degree in international and comparative law. She has been working at the National Institute for Environment and Development in Suriname, NIMOS, since 2007 in the position of legal advisor. She has been at the forefront of many environmentally related policy and legislation initiatives, such as the promulgation of the Environmental Framework Act in 2020. She is also actively involved in formulating implementation regulations for the Environmental Framework Act, such as regulations on environmental impact assessments, environmental pollution, waste management, and hazardous substances. That's quite a mouthful. I was having a bit of trouble getting it all aloud, but it's a very impressive list. Ms. Griffith, please go ahead.
Your mic is on mute, Miss Gina. Maybe you could chat to us what's the problem.
Hi, hello. I didn't have permission to unmute, so that's why. All right. Okay. Hi everyone.
So sorry for that.
No problem. Hi everyone. I'm going to share my screen now for my presentation. Can everyone see that? Okay. So first of all, I'm sorry, Matai, for giving your tongue troubles with my bio. I tried to make it as simple as I could, but it didn't really work, apparently. So yeah, so my name is Gina Griffith. I will be talking to you also about plastic pollutions, but like Ms. Annalisa said in her presentation, I'll be focusing more on land pollution. And talking about it in more the sense of the Caribbean as a whole, and just not only Suriname, where I'm from. So yeah, so that's the presentation. This is the content of the presentation. So just a short introduction on what plastic pollution is in the Caribbean also. And then I'm going to talk about also something that Ms. Annalisa talked about is the roadmap for policymakers, plastic waste, and how it is actually a product of the economic model that we are currently having. And that we need to think ahead and we need to think about how do we make waste obsolete. And then I'll be talking about the circular economy. And at the end, I'll have some main takeaways. I hope it's understandable for everyone. I've put in some links also to make it accessible. The presentation will be shared, so the links will, I hope that the links will be hyperlinks that you can click on them, but either you can just type into Google and you can go to those sites and get more information on that. Okay, so plastics, right? I mean, I guess by now you know that it's a big problem. and mostly like you heard in the presentation before mine, is that if you look at the plastic that comes into the ocean and also plastic that is on land, most of it is most of the plastics that we have come from plastic packaging. So that is the packaging that that the clothes items come in, the packaging that your food items come in, the plastic bags. Most of it is plastic packaging. It's 47% of plastic waste globally, and this is data from 2015. So it's been identified as the most problematic to manage. And single-use plastic is about 8 to 9% of the global waste stream. And with single-use plastics, we mean plastics that are used just one time and then thrown away. And the plastic packaging falls under that. But you also have to think of plastic plates, plastic cutlery. You have to think about straws. Straws are a big issue in when it comes to waste, and all types of other plastics that are just used one time. And it's a product of the petrochemical industry, meaning that it's made of petroleum. So petroleum is the basic component of plastic, and then they add a lot of chemicals to it to give it its flexibility or its durability. It has a widespread application. I mean, you will find it everywhere. Plastic is used for everything, from some things that you would not even think that those are plastic. Like, for example, clothes. A lot of clothes are made of plastic. So every time that you see polyester, it's some type of plastic that's put in there. Fleece, a lot of fleece, like you have these really fluffy blankets that we like to use, are the fleece clothes that you wear if you're in like countries where it's winter and things like that. Those are also made of plastics. And because of its durability, its versatility, so you can use it in a lot of ways. It's very durable, it's very long lasting, it's low in production cost, and it can be high quality, and it decays very slowly. That makes it that it's useful. But the same things that make it good as a product are the same things that make it a big issue when it comes to waste, because it's because of the way it's built, and because of its durability and its high quality, and because it's decay resistant. That is the main reason why plastic is an issue when it comes to waste management, because it stays in the environment for very long time. You have 7 types of plastics, or you can range them on 7 types of plastics. And if you have something that's plastic, you can always see under which category it falls. And I have a bottle here. I hope you can see my bottle. I have a bottle here, and this bottle is plastic, and then here under it you can see it has this little, you can't see it of course, but it has this little triangle with a number inside of it, and that is the number represents the type of plastic that it is. So mine is and my eyes are really getting bad, it's 7. That means that my plastic bottle falls in the 7th category, and that's the others category, BPA, polycarbonate, and Lexan. Meaning that it's made up of a lot of, it can be, sometimes it's a mix of types of plastics that are used. But you have PET, we all know PET, right? The little bottles that you buy your drinks in on the street or in the store, that's PET. You have HDPE, you have PVC, you have 7 types. And all of these, some of them are single use, like PET. PET is made to be used just once, and then it needs to be disposed of in a certain way. And then you have others that can be reused, like my bottle, for example. So most of them are single-use, non-biodegradable, meaning that it does not degrade in any biological sense. Like if you would throw some fruit on the ground somewhere outside, the fruit will at some point it will disappear. It will be degraded, biodegraded by a lot of microorganisms. PET does not. What happens? It will become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until we're talking about the microplastics and the nanoplastics that Ms. Annalisa already talked about. And those are very, very, very dangerous, because they become so small that they can transfer into the body through a lot of other ways. You can eat it, it can come into the body. They just did some studies on plastic baby bottles, the ones that they use to feed babies in. And out of that study, they found out that a baby in its first year, it would get millions of nanoplastic particles into its body. So right from the time you're born, you're already ingesting plastics every day. So that's not a good thing. Like I mentioned, they break down very slowly, and so we're talking about 500 years. I mean, nobody even lives that long. And they take up a considerable amount, because usually they're big. They don't have a lot of weight, but they do have a lot of volume. And it's deemed as the second most harmful material disposed in the natural environment. So it's an issue. It's a very, very big issue. And what we see on a global scale, we also see in the small island developing states. So that's the Caribbean, but not only the Caribbean, all the other islands. And if we look at geographical location, the consumption patterns, and the environmental sensitivities, those amplify the negative impacts of the waste. It's even so that some of the Caribbean islands have surpassed the global daily average of 0.74 kilograms per capita, meaning kilograms per capita, meaning kilograms per person, right? So, and these are the biggest ones. It's the US Virgin Islands with a per capita average of waste of 4.46 kilograms. That's 4 kilograms per person. British Virgin Island, Puerto Rico, and Aruba. Also, you have the in our Caribbean region, you have Trinidad and Tobago, that was also named. Suriname, for example, has like an average of 1 kilo per person. That's a lot. That's a lot of plastic waste that we are producing as per person on a daily basis. So that's very, very unsettling, actually. So with respect to plastic waste, the Caribbean Sea is regarded as the second most plastic contaminated space. Ms. Annalisa was talking about those plastic floating islands that you have in the seas of the world. And it's an estimation of plastic waste that ranges from 600 to 1,414 plastic items per square kilometer. And the issue, another point is that we are not virgin plastic production countries, meaning that we ourselves are not producing plastics. We are importing plastics. So we're using plastic, we're consumers of products that are packaged in plastics or otherwise. So we don't produce it ourselves. So these are the facts. Also, we have the Caribbean region is also one of the main contributors to plastic pollution, and it has the dubious distinction of having 10 of the largest per capita polluters of single-use plastic in the world. 10. the Caribbean is like this big, right? In relation to the whole world. And we have the top, and in the top 10 of the 30th largest contributors. So that's something that we have to think about. Some countries have taken a stand. I have to say, I think almost all Caribbean countries, I'm not really sure the last time I checked, but almost all Caribbean countries have some type of action that they're now taking towards getting a handle on this plastic waste problem. So a lot of countries have responded by implementing different kind of policies. So like importation bans on plastic bags, styrofoam, things like that. And what studies have found out is that the biggest reason for the amount of plastic pollution that we have in the Caribbean is the lack of proper waste management and awareness. So we don't know what to do with the plastics. So the plastics come in, we use them, we don't properly take care of them after they have become waste. And on the other hand, also a lot of people are still not really aware of why plastic is a problem. So this brings me, so after having sketched that, the facts, having given the facts and given you an idea of what this means for us in the Caribbean, I want to talk about some actions that we can take. There's this interesting document that was made by the United Nations Environment Program, the UNEP, because plastic has become a global problem and it's now being addressed as a global problem, meaning that people on a global level are, the countries on a global level are starting to talk about this, like, hey, we need to do something about that. And so out of that, they may had a publication, Single-Use Plastics, a Roadmap for Sustainability. It was published in 2018. I have the hyperlink in the presentation. You can download the document. It's very interesting. It also has a very simple fact sheet where you can just in like two or three pages or 4 pages, you can see what the document is talking about. But what the roadmap is about, you can see that here. It has 10 steps. 10 steps that countries can consider when introducing bans or levies on single-use plastics. You need to know what you're talking about. How much plastics are you producing as a country? I mean, you can't make policy or make legislation if you don't know what it is that you're producing. Then you need to think about, okay, how can we face this issue? What are the impacts? Number 3, what are the impacts of the different actions that we're taking? So if you're doing an importation ban on styrofoam, for example, in Suriname, we did an importation ban, I think it was in 2018 or 19. I don't really recall the exact year, but just recently. And so the question was like, oh my God, we can't use styrofoam anymore. So everybody was in a big panic because all of a sudden we can't use styrofoam anymore. So everybody, all the restaurants, everywhere they were where they use styrofoam and packaging. You know, this was a big, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Oh my God, it's going to be such a big issue. But when the time, and oh yes, the prices of the products are going to increase because we will have to buy these new environmental friendly packaging materials, and they're more expensive. So our prices of our products are going to increase, etc., etc., etc. By the time that the ban really started, actually none of these things were that big of an issue. And now everybody's just going about its way like we never had styrofoam. So most of the what we would call impacts are also like perceptive, you know, that's what people think that will happen, but not really what will actually happen. So you have to take that in consideration. Talk to stakeholders, raise awareness, and then just once you do it, just go about and look, how is it working? Is it working? Do we need to adjust anything? Enforcement obviously is a big issue in the Caribbean as a whole, because we like to make a lot of nice laws and regulations, but then when it comes down to actually, you know, having people do it, and enforcing that, so really, like, you know, going around and saying like, hey, you're not allowed to use styrofoam anymore, why are you using styrofoam, stop using styrofoam. Then when it comes to that, we're not really that good at enforcing. So these are just the 10 steps. But what I really want you to focus on, I put this big red fat arrow down on the bottom. Transitioning to more eco-friendly alternative can be a lengthy process. In the meantime, strengthening circular thinking and waste management systems can successfully help in reducing plastic pollutions. And Ms. Annalisa already talked a little bit about circularity, about circular thinking, and I'm going to go onto that road, onto that path too, because I do believe that that is the way that we need to go in the Caribbean. And so, sorry, I'm moving too fast. So what we now have is what you would call a circular, it's a linear economy. So it's here, you see this little graph on the bottom, take, make, dispose. So we take natural resources, we make something with them, and then after we're done with them, we dispose of it. And this is not sustainable in any way, because you're putting a lot of pressure on, one, the natural resources, which we are running out of on one side, and two, you're putting a lot of pressure on waste management in countries that do not have institutions, the legal or the logistical framework to handle these amounts of plastics that are generated every day. So we have to think circular. We have to think in terms of a circular economy. And a circular economy is based on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So we need to think ahead, right? How do we make plastic waste obsolete? How do we make a system that we do not have plastic waste anymore? And how can we talk about that? So in the Caribbean, we have to come to a point where products that enter the market are designed for circularity, meaning that the products are made in such a way that they can be kept in their original state for a longer time through repair, refurbishment, remanufacturing. We have to increase the efficiency of using goods, and we have to design products in such a way that they are easy to repair, or we can send them back to the manufacturer. This will mostly look at products that are made of plastic, but that are not single use. Also, we have to take waste prevention is important. So optimizing use of goods, free collection of end of service life goods, give incentives to return old products when buying new. Like for example, if you go to the store to buy water, like now we have these big jugs of water that they use on the water dispensers. Those are plastic, it's PET. But when you go to buy another bottle of water, you have to bring your old one back. And that's definitely a way that you can make sure that it stays in rotation and relation longer. And if and when disposal costs become an issue, we have to look at putting in regulations to give bigger incentives to avoid or prevent waste. And one way, and that's kind of like, that's where I kind of want to end. One way is that we need to introduce concepts such as the extended producer responsibility. It's a big word. It's called, for short, it's just called EPR. And that is that you are putting the responsibility for waste disposal on the producers of the products that are at the end becoming waste. So make producers or importers, in our case, in the Caribbean case, it's importers because we don't have, we don't make products at that much. We have to make the importers responsible for the waste the products that they put on the market produce. So don't make it a problem of the consumer only and a problem of the government only, but make it a problem of the producers, of the importers, because they are also part of the whole cycle in the loop. So some main takeaways to end this: we are among the biggest per person polluters, which is not a very nice thing to know or to have. We don't have virgin plastic production, mostly import and consuming. We're not able to carry the burden of plastic waste management alone. We need to start looking at things like the UNEP roadmap for policymakers, and we need to start thinking circular. And ultimately, the Caribbean must come to a state where it puts the responsibility of waste prevention and liability for the end of service life objects on broadest shoulders, meaning the big corporations who are making these products also need to start paying for the disposal of their products. So that was it. I hope that it was understandable, clear, and if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer those. Thank you. No questions?
Our host is having some slight issues with the sound.
Okay.
He doesn't hear clearly, so it might take a couple of seconds to hear him. Bear with
Okay.
us.
All right.
Just quick test. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. I can hear you just fine.
All right, I suspect he's having some troubles. I think it's clear that he's having some troubles. I think I'll be doing a bit of his segment until he comes back. So I see there are many questions in the chat. As promised, we have the question round now, so you can ask questions and they'll be answered. I'm waiting for Gaitan to tell me which questions I should ask. Gaitan, are you there? Is your internet good? Gaitan?
Everybody seems to be having trouble with the internet.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. He's here.
That's
He's
the,
here. He's here.
that's
No
the
worries.
issue of 2020 and 2021.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Gaitan, you hear me? Okay, I'll start with this one, and I'll give the translators a chance to translate. Any advice on how to go about presenting this to my respective government? I suspect that the question's directed towards you, Miss Gina. If it's directed towards someone else, please make that known. Please tell me if nobody tells me something. I think Miss Gina can answer it.
Yeah, thanks. I see it's Delise. I hope I'm saying that I'm pronouncing that correctly, right? So Delise, yeah, so what I see you also kind of went further into as in what topics do you think are most crucial? Um, I think that we need to start to just think about circularity. I think I think you're referring to that part, right? What can we do to get our governments to really go into that? We need to stop being we need to stop letting the bigger developing countries dictate our own development, meaning that we need to start thinking about how can we make our own development path. What do we want, what do we need? And what we want and what we need is that we need to stop getting all this plastic that is coming in, because like I said, we ourselves are not producing, we're not virgin plastic producers. We do have some production. I mean, they get these little pet bottles and then they just blow them out and then you get the big pet bottles. If you have like a water production in your country going on, like they have their own water production. So we need to start thinking in terms of, okay, what do we need? And then we tell them what it is that we need and what it is that we want. And that's why I was talking about the extended producer responsibility. It's very hard to do because it takes a lot of, you have to think the other way around, because right now all the costs are falling on the shoulders of our governments. All the costs of waste management, it's either the consumer that is put, the blame is put on the consumer. Yeah, you're throwing away the bottles, and oh, they are. I mean, we need to put the blame where the blame needs to be put. They are also part of the problem. And then the government is getting a lot of, oh yeah, well, you're not doing waste, your waste collection is no good, and then your waste disposal is no good. But the fact of the matter is that we're small Caribbean countries. We have enough problems as it is. So we shouldn't be taking on problems that are actually not only our problems, but are problems of a bigger issue, which is that we have a linear economy. So we take something, we make it, we use it, and then we throw it away. So we need to think about that. And I would really recommend you check out that UNEP roadmap document, because that really gives some good pointers to how can we as countries, how can we tackle this issue. And I think there you would get a lot of pointers also that you can use. But the main thing is that we have to start thinking circular. And now I know most of you are still quite young, so, but there are also there's this really nice and interesting free online course on circular economy that you can follow. It's a little bit it's more on university level, but if you're interested, I can put that, I can give that information also. So I would say, think about we need to think about how do we manage, thinking about how do we get these products in, where do we put the responsibility? Do we need to put some responsibility also on the shoulders of the importers, and not only on the shoulders of the consumers? And then also how we need to think about making collection, for example, better or easier, because right now there's no incentive for people to collect, right? And even if they want to collect, it's still very hard for them. I mean, in Suriname, they're really trying their best to make collection a point, but I still have to literally drive the bags with all the plastic that I've collected from my household. I would have to drive to somewhere to put it in a bin, and then it's collected. Most people will not take that time. I mean, let's be honest. Most people will not take that time. So it also has to do with awareness. You have to make people aware why they need to do this. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you an answer, somewhere to start. So there's no one answer. It's actually a lot of steps that we really need to work on. But I would really recommend you read that roadmap, because it will give you some really interesting pointers. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Griffith. Are there any other questions for Ms. Griffith or any of the other experts? You now have the floor, participants. No questions. Nobody. I can't see any raised hands. If that's the case, I would like to thank all the experts. Thank you, Ms. Gina Griffith. Thank you, Ms. Annalisa Rashid, who couldn't be here, but still many thanks. I would also like to thank Ms. Chantal Longbrug and Dr. David Singh. Thank you for showing your expertise and helping us in initiating this event. I would like to ask Mr. Matt Render if he could present or just talk for a short while about the conference and about the support the Rotary has been showing us. So, Mr. Render, if you're available and present.
Yes, hi. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to take a couple of moments just to thank President Daniel and Matai and the rest of the team for putting this event together today. It's been a really well organized event with some fantastic content. I'd also like to recognize our guest speakers, Dr. David Singh, Chantal Lamberg, Annalisa Rashid, and Gina Griffith, and thank each of them for their inspiring presentations. And of course, I want to thank each of you that has attended this initial session. For you to have given of your time on a weekend and at a time when many of you have exams speaks volumes about your commitment to the work of Interact and specifically to environmental sustainability in the region. Personally, I can't wait to see the projects that each of you come up with for the competition. I did want to make a couple of comments relating to the international coastal cleanup that Annalisa Rashid mentioned in her recorded presentation on marine plastic pollution. The Rotary Environmental Sustainability Committee is in the process of launching a cleanup competition. This is open to all members of the Rotary family across the district, so Rotary, Rotaract, Interact and Early Act. We encourage all members of the family and their friends, their loved ones, to identify spaces within our communities that are most in need of waste removal efforts, to come together and to collect this waste and to use the ICC Clean Swell app to track what you're collecting so that we can announce the country that has collected the most waste by the end of the Rotary year, at the end of June. You can find more information on the competition on the district website. We will also be including information in the next edition of the district newsletter, which will be circulated this coming week. So if you were inspired in particular by that presentation and you want to do something related to cleanup, then please do submit your results to be entered into that competition. We'd love to see what you're able to do. So thank you again for inviting me to join the session today. Thank you for attending and to our guest speakers for their presentations, and good luck with your project.
Thank you, Mr. Render. I would like to ask President Daniel Hilferson if he would also like to place some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you, Matai. Once again, from my side as well, thank you to all the experts, all the district members, and especially to all of you interactors that have joined today. Thank you for your commitment. Some things about the competition. As you all know, the next webinar will be on May 8th. Yeah, so that's in about 2 months. On that webinar, we will have a board of experts or a board of or panel members, and you'll be asked to present your project proposal. Those project proposals will then be scored, and the winning team will get a cash prize. Some more information regarding the presentations. You can choose one of these 4 topics discussed today. Plastic pollution on land, marine plastic pollution, sorry, biodiversity or climate change. Your projects can be national projects or international projects. As I would say, the more the merrier. So if you would like to try and make a project proposal for an international project, that'd be fine. There can only be 2 to 3 members per team that will actually present on May 8th. So your team consists of many more people, but 2 to 3 members can only present on that day. And the presentation will have a max time limit of 10 minutes. We want to do this so that you can highlight the most important things and kind of sell us on your project proposal with this short points, keywords, all of those things. As I've said, there'll be a board of panelists. They'll rate your presentations. One thing to note: the registration for this whole event. So to register to also be able to present your project proposal on May 8th will be open to until March 23rd. So in 10 days from now. Because every presentation that's been done here today will be made available for everyone to view. So we see no reason why later registrations would not be possible. I can disclose today that the winning team will get a minimum of $750 US. That's the minimum. This number can raise until it can raise indefinitely. We don't know, but it's minimum of $750. As usual, the more info about this whole thing will be made available in the coming weeks. I think it'll be made available around the same time that the presentations will be made available. So have a look out in your inbox, because we'll be sending the actual documents regarding this to you all, and also have a look out on the Rotary website or the District 7030 website. Yes, that'll be all for me. And once again, thank you very, very, very much for your participation today.
Thank you, President Daniel. It shows that the environment and all that it affects are very important to Interact Canwy. We even had a new commission put in place. And I would like the director of that commission, the director of environment, if he would like to do the thanks for all parties concerned. Gaitan, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gaitan Garpasat, and I am the Environmental Director of Interact Club Canwy. It was a great honor to organize this environmental webinar with Daniel, Angia, and Matai. I want to thank the District Secretary, Ms. Soraya Warner, the District Environmental Sustainability Chair, Mr. Matt Render, and the Rotary District Public Image Chair, Mr. Sean Paddy. This webinar would not be possible without the help of our wonderful advisors, Nancy Del Prado and Sharon McDonald, whose help was essential in organizing all of this. I also want to thank the environmental experts, the translators, Vicky Gusto, Natalie Gilles, and Mavis Gibus. And of course, the clubs in our district 7030 for the great work. And I also want to thank Ms. Narda Ramkisun for posting the flyer on her Facebook page. It was a pleasure to listen to the speeches of the environmental experts. I think that I can speak for everyone that we have learned a lot today. So I hereby thank you for your presentations. And last but not least, I want to thank all of the participants for making time to participate in this webinar. I hope that we see you all at the conference in May. Thank you and have a great night, everyone.
Without trailing on too long, thank you, everybody. We had interact clubs from Aruba, Suriname. We had one from Martinique. We had, I'll get the list. Wait a minute, give me a sec. Yeah, so Interact Club of Guadeloupe was here. Thank you for being here. Interact Club Joanna Kaira was here from Martinique. Thank you. Queen's College Interact Club of Barbados was here. Nice. The Interact Aruba and Interact Colegio Arubano were here. Thank you so much for being here. St. Joseph's Convent and Sir Arthur Lowe Community College Interact Club is also here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Interact Canwy, for showing the support. Interact TTT, Interact Chutekantin wanted to be here but had some personal reasons, but they had there was somebody in their place and they will get all the information, so they were here in spirit. Thank you all, and with this, have a very nice evening afterwards. We hope to see you all at the conference in May. Thank you. And merci.